Hello and welcome to my workshop. So today we're going to get started on a new project. It's going to be a UPS based drift truck. Alright, so let's get started. I start off with making the rear box. The panels are just straight, so I can avoid any major vacuum forming. What I did was make the corner sections on the vacuum former. The straight side panels just get glued in from underneath. Since the corner pieces were fairly simple, all I needed to do was cut some strips on a table saw and round over the corners. I could then cut back the proper size after removing from the mold. Traditional methods were used to piece together the framework before inserting the center sections. For me, this is adding a backer piece so the butt-jointed sections have adequate material to hold them together. The first step is to use a solvent that softens up the plastic. I use a mix of clear PVC cleaner and MEK substitute. You can just use MEK substitute, but it works really fast and sometimes is a bit aggressive with the softening process. Unfortunately, I've had pieces which were softened to the point where I needed to scrap them. With each panel put together, I can start tying them into one and forming the box structure. Each side panel needs to get a cutout where the wheels will fit later. I also trimmed the bottom to match the slight taper of the original model I am following. The model is based on a Mercedes Sprinter van, but I'm taking a lot of inspirations from a Brooder toy I found online. Since the roof is flat all the way across, I need to make sure the joins are bodywork together. The first step is to roughen up the area with sandpaper. You then apply a thin layer of glazing putty before sanding back. With the rear panel mostly complete, I focus my attention to the front cab. The van I'm following has the square box grafted right into the more rounded cab. A few pieces of MDF are glued together and the rough shape of the van side profile is cut out. This leaves a rather squared off piece which needs to be carved back to the more rounded shape. I start with a belt sander for the bottom. When looking at the top though, I realized that this would make a lot of dust, so I decided to remove as much material as possible using a saw. Once I am satisfied with the shape, I can start carving in the details such as body lines and window openings. Now that I have a 3D printer, I can make panels and pieces that can be glued onto the vacuum molds. This allows me to get hard to carve pieces made accurately and, more importantly, duplicated from side to side so that they match perfectly. It's rather easy to carve one side, but to make a mirror copy on the opposite side is a nightmare. I do my best to make matching sides as I go along. I try to get one side to a certain stage, then match the other to where I am in that process. You can usually have reference marks as you go that are near impossible to figure out later on. Each piece is vacuum formed and the shape is cut in a way to align with matching panels. The first panel to go is in the rear. Admittedly, most of this will be cut off later, but having it all together now is easier to handle. The roof and the hood are made from MDF, similar to the side panels. Since the side panels are made, these molds can be adjusted so they line up as perfect as possible. The hood has a natural body line, so all you need to do is make sure the edges are smooth before gluing in place. The roof is meant to be one piece without a seam. This means that more body filler is needed to hide that seam. I also apply some more filler on the box piece at this time to avoid wasting what was already mixed up. I try to mix up just enough, but that is not always possible. As mentioned before, the rear of the cab gets mostly removed. When glued to the box section later on, there will be an opening to the rear from the cab. I'm not sure if the real ones are like this, but it seemed reasonable to me. The box section needs some additional details. This includes a rear and side door. There's no need to have a functioning door, so I just make a panel that could be glued on. After a few key pieces, it starts to look the part. One of the more complicated pieces is the front bumper. My first thought was to make it by hand. It took a lot of convincing myself, but eventually I decided to 3D design the mold. I was very happy with the final piece and learned quite a bit doing it. I also 3D printed some air vents that went into the hood. I just needed to cut out the hole and glue in the 3D pieces from beneath. After filling in the gap and sanding back, it will look quite convincing. If I did this again, I would probably think of something easier, but in the end, it worked out just fine. The entire body needs to be sanded back prior to applying a thick coat of filler primer. The primer makes it easier to see flaws and does a great job of filling in small imperfections. There are a few more 3D printed pieces to go on. I have some hinges which need to be glued in place to add the look of the functioning rear door. I also cut holes for some clear 3D printed taillights. When you paint the clear 3D prints with a clear red, the look is spot on to a real taillight. It was quite a bit of learning on this, way more than expected, but it's always good to pick up some new skills. This will allow me to carry these on to future projects. There's still a lot more to go on the van, but I am very happy with how it is so far. Looking forward to getting even more detail. But until then, I'll see you on the rocks.